Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 25th, and well, simple advice sometimes is very easy to follow. We recognized that we had the steel coming below cyan, and at that point the orange had not completely crossed above, but as we started the day, it did in fact that. We already had green below. It was starting to tip up in pre-market, but didn't take long for it to fade off of it. And once we broke that 29.90, it was sort of handwriting on the wall. It actually came in earlier on the earlier charts, around that 308 range. We hit the algo resistance, and it just really couldn't penetrate that. And then news of the impending impeachment came through, and that just sent the market plummeting, and we were looking for right around that 76% if it did, and that's exactly where we went to. But actually dipped a little bit below that and recovered off of it. And we haven't dipped below the red line, but we were already seeing a shakeout moving to near zero, and is now definitely in the red. So we could see some more significant, and again below ABM green levels and that, then we've got a whole different setup, and that's down at 29.65 range, and then that opens up, well, coming all the way back to the 50% down to 29. So we could be in for a fun one to get close to the end of the month, especially with throwing in the uncertainty of the political dynamic, because both ways it really rocks everything. You have Trump impeachment on the one side, you have Biden with his son and the bribe, so that's the front runners on both sides of the party facing complete uncertainty, and that leaves you with pure socialist and then nothing on the other side. So yeah, markets are going to get spooked by that. NASDAQ right at the 61%, so much weaker as far as its dip, but looking identical from a DOC reading to the S&P. And from a euro standpoint, well, I mean, modest help. It was weak for most of the day, but that helped push it up because it stopped the inflow into dollars. And of course, you're always hearing about the extension of credit from the repo situation, the overnight lending. That's not as dramatic, I don't think, as the difficulties with the euro. But if the U.S. is going to have political turmoil, that should push money back to the euro. At least it'll keep it from coming to the U.S. Oil still unable to, even though Saudi said that they're not going to be able to fix their production in time, it still wasn't enough to make a difference because again, the ability for the U.S. to make up for that, and the stockpiles that already exist can more than accommodate that length of time. So not really as much a factor. And again, gold is going to be the haven because again, it's not a fiat currency tied to government's debt and that kind of thing. And this is where precious metals always become the fallback position, more so even than cryptocurrencies and that, because those can have their own instability, as we witnessed as well today. Well, and here it is, turning to the 5K chart. So we got up to this previous algo 3008 right here and started to hit some blockage to it, and we ended up with our magenta candles. The BKs came through. We did pop back up onto that briefly and tried to hit it a third time, so equivalently formed three little top there. The DOC spread came back over here, which was just before the breakdown below that. I believe I started my short around 3007 range, and once we get the blue candle here, it was an interesting one because we were coming off this cross here, but no recent dip cross of steel below cyan or anything else. I was looking for, well, is green going to overtake it? In this particular case, the green overtook it right about here, and then it was literally the next bar after that you had the rejection of cyan to green with steel dipping below, and that was enough to say, okay, this is likely to head much lower. And then we started it, and I highlighted this one because without that reset dipping below and back above, you're just in a huge continuation. That any little pops become opportunities to look for these kind of separations, which signal another wave of selling. So every time you had a meeting or a move towards green and cyan and then a separation, that creates a new sell wave, and you can kind of just follow through with those. You can just start right there, beginning of one, Next time they get closer to meeting, it's not even that close. Right here, they start to separate again. Another wave. Here they meet, separate again, and that takes us down to newer lows, even further down here. And then we started to even out a bit, and we had our first cross of steel below from a final short sort of depiction. Let me slide this over here and get to the end of that. And then you ended up with the bullish cross coming over here, and then it was a matter of, okay, am I going to break the 7.5? I did that right pretty early on going into the start of this, and broke through that high, and that was enough to push us up towards the 77, because we're right at the 71, so it was just a nice play between the two algo levels. And then you had the DOC spread without steel having coming from above it, crossed it back over here. So it was a bit of a wage distance. Wasn't sure how much of a drop would come from that, but it was still worth enough to add to that. And then sure enough, it did start to fail. And then this blue candle with the pivot higher came in, but without any real support whatsoever, because you were so far from this bullish crossover back over here. And then boom, you had steel below, orange above, at the same time green's going below. It's classic for short move. And in fact, it did that, but then green crossing back above cyan right there, and it's hard to see it, but there was a little pivot right there, and then boom, came up across it, and that led to what we have right now, which is just a move back to the 71. So it just sort of negated that previous short, because you can see turnaround was literally right at the exact same spot of the 38%, and it was pretty much just back and forth for the largest part. Even now, it's still stuck right around that 29.71, but overall, great action for the day. A little bit of turmoil like that. Still was pretty orderly. I think that we can see that from what we were getting reading-wise. So no objections to that, but I think that this is going to be one of those unsettled periods, and as long as we have the political goings on, that's really going to throw things into turmoil and could cause a significant catalyst change in perception of, how do people feel? Are they going to become more conservative if they think there's going to be political upheaval for the next, 8 months or more? Even going into an election year, in general, Americans tend to get a bit more conservative unless they think that, things are settled, which in this particular case, I don't think anyone does. And that's going to, I think, add both to volatility, but it's also likely to hamper purchases, which, when you're in a consumer-driven economy, that could be a significant problem. So I think we'll be touching some of these lower levels regardless of how things turn out. There's just enough headwinds to cause people to be a little bit more cautious. As always, though, I will put anything new and relevant up and go over these details as they happen. As always, trade well. We'll talk to you later.